you, and thank you.
Thank you, Josephina. Wonderful to hear everyone's work, interest, location. It sounds like this is an amazing group to engage with some of the ideas and concepts that I'm going to be presenting. I'll try to run through them as quick as I can. I think we've lost about 18 minutes or so, I'll try to try to leave some time at the end for some questions. But if you've got any burning questions during it, we're a small enough group that you can just unmute yourself, jump in with a question or a comment, and I'll try to sort of address it as we run through the presentation as well. So with that in mind, let me do the screen sharing and I'll run through the slides that I have prepared for you guys. Hopefully this does the correct one. It usually does the wrong version. Okay, let me just switch. All right, so I'm going to go through essentially what Doughnut Economics means for the world of business and the world of finance, and some of the practical ways those who are engaging with businesses, shaping policies, public policies, particularly at city level, on that affect and impact businesses, what they could be doing, and give some insights into some of the innovations happening in this space more broadly. So essentially, I mean, the top line is that none of you need convincing that there's something deeply out of balance. You heard from Kate Raworth the broader picture of where we are as humanity in terms of overshooting planetary boundaries and falling short on life's essentials. And some of the things that are really relevant for the world of business I want to highlight include the fact that circularity is in decline. That, you know, if we look at the report, the Circular Gap report of the Circular Economy Foundation, the Circular Economy Foundation, what we find is that material use is rising, that in the last 5 years alone, we've used about as much materials as the entire 20th century. At the same time, loads of climate targets being set by companies, but a lack of action being taken by them, including with the Science Based Targets Initiative, just recently delegating a whole bunch of companies that made really big commitments, 239 of them, companies like Unilever and Microsoft, relegating them down because they're not taking the action that's necessary. At the same time, we know poverty is rising again, according to the World Bank. Inequality is rising in many forms. Workers and farmers in global supply chains are stuck in positions of poverty. They're stuck in trading relationships that trap them in poverty. But stock markets are doing great. They're at record highs. Private equity returns are very high. And ultimately, business models are not transforming. And that's really a theme of this, is that we need a transformation in industry. That's going to require transformation of businesses. And that transformation needs to be unlocked somehow. So what is that transformation? Well, we can look at agriculture. We know we need to move away from, you know, intensive monocrop, high input agriculture to things like agroecology and regenerative agriculture. We know we need to move our energy systems towards renewables. We know we need to move from sort of fast fashion to slower, fairer clothing models. And we know we need to move from sort of destructive and unaffordable building models to the kinds of models you would have heard from Kate and others that are much more eco-friendly and accessible. So these transformations need to happen. And at the heart of these transformations are those two concepts that Kate refers to, of being regenerative by design and distributive by design. And when we look at regenerative dynamics in the business world, we actually have many examples of modular products. We've got examples like Selco in India, which is decentralized its approach of trying to have access to energy across India through local renewable energy models where local technicians are supported and trained. We've got examples like Houdini that Kate mentioned, where there's circular fabrics that are being pursued, and the intellectual property behind that is put into the commons for others to build on. And examples like Sanergy toilets in Nairobi in Kenya that are providing affordable, accessible toilets for people in the slums of Nairobi, that then the waste is used from those toilets, treated, sanitized, and put into agricultural use. So we've got these on the on the ecologically regenerative side, and there's of course the socially distributive side that we also need to pursue. And again, we've got many examples of this. Examples like creative handicrafts, where the business is designed in Mumbai as a fashion company. It's designed to bring into the workforce some of the most disenfranchised and disempowered women, make them, train them, make them into co-owners of the business and co-governors of the business. Got examples of employee ownership, like richer sounds, and conversions into employee ownership really skyrocketing in certain parts of the world. Certainly places like the UK, it's growing at 37% per annum at the moment. And also select parts of the world where legislation and local policy is supportive of it, we've seen it grow. We've got examples like Fairbnb and Lush, both of which are focusing on social impact. Fairbnb using half the revenue that it collects to support local communities and let local community groups decide how that money is used and spent. And Lush paying its fair share of tax, using the fair tax mark to demonstrate that. So we've got those examples. But I think we would all agree that these are examples that are often seen as in the margins. This isn't the norm of the business world. This is the norm of the corporate realities. And we need to transform the business world more broadly. And there are multiple ways to achieving this. We can bring in that public pressure through regulation, through also collective action by workers, farmers, communities, etc. We can also support enlightened leadership in the business world and at the most senior levels. We can support new metrics, new targets, new goals where companies aspire to achieve social and ecological outcomes that are measured and that are set as targets. We can have more effective business case that companies can pursue. And in order to support all of this, what we need to do is to also reinforce that we focus on transforming what I'll introduce in a minute as the deep design of business. And the reason we focus as Doughnut Economics practitioners on transforming the deep design of business is that, well, in order to have more effective regulations, we also need companies that are going to lean into those regulations, aren't going to undermine them, lobby against them, try to undercut and circumvent them. In order to have enlightened leaders that are effective, we're going to need companies that open the way and the path for those enlightened leaders. We're going to need companies that not only set those targets, but act on them and have got mechanisms in place to lean in with ambition into achieving its targets. And we also need to make the business case in a far more broad way than just pure financial value. And in order to then look at this and look at how do we redesign companies to support all these other levers of change that can achieve what we're trying to achieve, what we propose is to look at the deep design of the business through its purpose, networks, governance, ownership, and finance. And this is about moving the design of the company away from the 20th century question, which is how much value can we extract through this enterprise, to the 21st century version question of how many benefits can we generate through this enterprise. So I'm going to go through a few examples, and I'm sort of going through as quickly as I can to leave some space for question and discussion at the end. But essentially, if we look at the purpose, how do we move towards models such as Tony's Chocolonely, which has said, look, we exist to make 100% slave-free the norm in chocolate. And it didn't just stop there. It was able to pursue strategies and practices in its supply chain that are adopting fair trade and going beyond even the fair trade minimum price and making long-term commitments to its farmers and suppliers. And it's been able to lock that in through a model that gives specific rights to a set of guardian shareholders. So there's a small group who own shares that don't have any economic rights. They don't get any dividends. But what they do get is an ability to make sure the company doesn't sway away from the core of its purpose. Other examples include in that we can look at it through the perspective of networks. So those relationships a company has with its suppliers, with its communities, with its workers, with its governments, with the rest of its industry. And an example that comes to mind here is El Puente, which is created a multi-stakeholder board, and its board includes representatives of its own employees, as well as representatives of its supply chain and beyond. And those representatives of the supply chain are a voice for the workers, farmers, artisans in its supply chain. and are able to shape the policies and strategies of the company at a corporate level through that. Now, El Puente is also one of the first in the world to have that. There's a small logo you can see there called People and Planet First. It's one of the first companies to use the People and Planet First verification and label. And that's a new model for determining if a business has got an enterprise design that is leaning into being focused on a purpose and on a mission. Next is governance, and this is about the decision-making powers, the structures that surround the business, and is it in service of finance, or is the governance in service of a purpose? An example here is Faith in Nature, a business that said, look, we're going to be the first company in the world to give nature a voice and a vote on our board, but we won't be the last. So they've worked with the organization Lawyers for Nature to give them an independent board seat that allows the Lawyers for Nature representative to be a voice for nature on the board, an independent voice, an external voice, one that can challenge the company, but also inspire staff that there's somebody inside at the highest levels who is truly a representative of the rights of nature. And then we can move on to ownership. And there are the whole host of ownership models that are really helpful, that are emerging, including models like steward ownership, models like employee ownership, or community ownership, or models that are hybrids as well between different models of ownership that are emerging. Steward ownership is a very interesting one. And what's interesting is that it says, look, we're going to have two kinds of share classes. One kind of shares that has all the governance rights, but none of the economic rights, and another that has all the economic rights and not the governance rights of the business. So one shareholder, for instance, in Einhorn, which is an example here, Patagonia is another example, has got all of the rights to whatever's left over in terms of the surplus that becomes dividends for the shareholders, but cannot influence the company to squeeze out more profits for those investors. So the investors get what's left behind, because the controlling governing rights, the governing shares, are held by a foundation that has a purpose of social and ecological benefit that is able to control the company longer term. Now that's being spread around the world as a model of steward ownership that's being effective in both bringing in investment and in ensuring that the company is controlled for its purpose. Next is finance, and here it's whether it's in service of financial returns or purpose. The example that comes to mind is Grameen Danone Food Company in Bangladesh, which said, look, let's create a new business where that reinvests all of its profits into a social mission. That social mission is focused on making sure that the products are as nutritious and as affordable as possible. So they reinvest their profits to fortify the yogurt with nutrients and minerals and vitamins. And they're also using the profits to make it as cheap as possible for the end consumer. So there are many other examples like this. There's a huge range of community-owned renewable energy that's emerging. For instance, Res Co-op, a European network of such community-owned energy organizations. Well, these now number nearly 2,000 across Europe, and there are specific policies as well that are supporting them across Europe and beyond. But then there are a whole load of other examples that I'm mentioning here, including profit-sharing model of Equal Exchange, a US employee-owned coffee company, or Cafe Direct, which is actually in the UK, but it's co-owned by the farmers who are growing the coffee, and the profits are used both for climate mitigation and to support the incomes and to benefit the farmers that are growing the coffee. But others like Manosta, Uruguay, or River Simple are also demonstrating ownership and governance in particular can be used as levers to design into the business a different kind of objective, a social and ecological objective. If you look at River Simple's model, and River Simple is a young car company actually based in Wales. They've got a guardianship model where their different stakeholders have a representative on their board to internalize all of those debates that might otherwise happen between customers and communities and workers and the environment. Those are all represented at the highest levels on the board through the guardianship model, Future Guardians board model. So essentially, the point of redesigning companies and to foster this kind of diversity of enterprise design is, firstly, we want to align the purpose of the business with across the business. We want to enable partnerships, deep partnerships with all the stakeholders that are critical for the company. We want to channel investment into where it's needed, and we want to lock in the legacy of the business. And ultimately, we also want to protect the mission of the business longer term, and ensure that the business is regenerative and distributive by design. So when I do this work, and I've done this now for over 2 years with business leaders in lots of different kinds of communities, some startup businesses, others family or privately held, others publicly listed companies, others that have private equity or venture capital behind them, all kinds of models, social enterprises, cooperatives. What we found is that the question that arises is, if you're going to do this, if we're going to redesign businesses in this way to be leaning into the social and ecological goals, then we're going to need a different kind of finance. We can't just go, and this goes to, I think, Mo, your question that you asked Kate at the end, that we can also discuss in a second. But ultimately, we're also going to need to design the financial investment into the business accordingly. And most businesses, so young businesses that are coming up, would say, look, we're going to go to venture capital. That's where we're being channeled. A lot of the startup hubs, the city has an incubator, the university has an incubator, or there's some sort of an entrepreneurial support system. They're all channeling me towards venture capital. Venture capital is not appropriate for most businesses that are rising. Venture capital only wants the businesses that have a shot at growing 10, 20, 30 times the size of what they are at the beginning, and to grow the investment that much and that far. So it squeezes every company into exponential growth. But at the same time, it's not able to deal with companies that maybe aren't going to be exponential in their growth of revenue, etc. So they need to start looking at lots of different kinds of models. And there are loads that are emerging, from like revenue-based finance to preferred stock models or convertible grants and supply chain financing, mezzanine debt, crowdfunding that was used. I mean, I showed very briefly earlier Fairphone, for instance, as an example of modular product design, a circular economy in practice in terms of product design. Well, they use crowdfunding to have the patient capital to enable them to have that circular business model. Others are using various other forms of finance. But what's critical is that there I listed called Transform Finance that we've collaborated with, and what they found in their work is that there's at least 3 billion investment funds available for instance, alternative ownership enterprises like employee ownership across the US and beyond. There are funds out there that are able to speak this language and adapt themselves and have a slightly more patient outlook and not necessarily squeeze the business to exponential growth. But we're going to need to talk the language of finance more effectively and educate each other on the importance of redesigning business. So ultimately, what we're advocating for here is that we need finance to be in service to life. And that means we need to redesign business, redesign financial expectations of the investors, redesign the purpose of finance, what's it there for, redesign the financial instruments themselves from not just focused on exponential growth and venture capital or high exits and private equity, but to lots of other emerging models of finance. And ultimately, we'll probably need to redesign the financial system as well. Now, we've created a set of tools to have this sort of exploration and journey, and that includes the business tool that I've been giving you a little bit of a sneak peek on. If you or others that you know are practitioners or consultants or advisors or run business networks or investor networks, you're free to register as one of these values-aligned organizations in order to use these tools that we've created, and they're all in the Creative Commons. And the business tool is available there as well that I've just run through. But ultimately, the question then at a city level and for policymakers, and I'm going to go through this in 2 minutes, is that what can policymakers do? So you want to see more of these businesses in a city? Well, what they can do is actually quite plentiful, and we did a bit of a mapping of some of the leading policies out there for city level policymakers, provincial, national, and transnational policymakers, and it comes down into 4 categories of policy. So you know, policies that can foster new businesses that are designed in this way. For instance, setting up funds that support such enterprises, targeting assistance to these sorts of businesses, creating place-based hubs of support, or allowing the use of publicly owned premises. They can also help convert existing businesses. And a lot of businesses started private companies or family-owned businesses, and a lot of them are converting to these alternative employee-owned structures, for instance, or steward ownership structures, because that's a way of locking in their purpose and mission. And there are lots of ways that policymakers can, for instance, exempt those sorts of conversions from taxes. In the UK, that 37% growth per year of employee ownership is happening because there's a tax break that means if you sell your business to your workers, you don't have to pay capital gains tax. And that's a real benefit. But there are a whole bunch of other ways you can sort of assist those conversions or help change the governance structure of companies. You can also, thirdly, recognize their role. So, all sorts of legislative and regulatory and policy instruments to recognize the role of such businesses in the economy. And you can target in tax and public procurement into that direction as well. So actively shaping public procurement and ensuring sort of appropriate tax treatment that is going to be much more effective in supporting these sorts of enterprise designs that I've given you a bit of a tour of. And of course, the role of policies goes beyond that. It's all the different things I list there, everything from investment policy to tax policy and startup support to the legal forms that are available, to industry policy, education awareness, and so on. And at a city level, I mean, there's a few that I really want to sort of pop out. So of those three areas, so shaping startups is quite important, and investing in community-owned startups that address those regenerative policy goals, for instance. Could be local community-owned renewable energy initiatives. It could be repair hubs. It could be other businesses that are more mainstream industries, but are designed in a regenerative or distributive way. Can help transform existing businesses as well by providing financing for those businesses, and could regulate the market more effectively in making sure that sort of investor-owned startups aren't competing unfairly, aren't advantaged locally over community-owned options or regenerative and distributive enterprise levels. And of course, there are lots of things at regional, national, transnational government as well, that level that I won't go into. But I'm going to stop here, and I'll end with this slide again. Sorry, it's just gone faster than I anticipated, which is where all the business related documents and resources and tools can be found. If you go to doughuteconomics.org, on the top right-hand corner, there is a themes section. If you use the drop-down menu to go to business and enterprise, it's a great way to get to all the different tools we created, including the policy tool that I just gave a very quick tour of in the last 3 minutes, but the various tools for investors, business owners, entrepreneurs, business leaders can use as well to ask those questions that you've got on at the center of your screen. How does the design of your business block transformative action, and how could a redesign of your business unlock transformative action? I'm going to stop there, and hopefully, I don't know, I haven't looked at the time, but hopefully I've left enough time to have a quick discussion and answer any questions.
Thank you, Erinch. Great. So, Mo, go ahead.
Thank you, Erinch. Highly appreciated. Thinking of the things that you have mentioned for the fashion and using circular infrastructure techniques, etc., or architectural or construction techniques, I see it's somehow, I'm totally from the school of David, not Goliath. So I do like small and medium enterprise. I come from that school. I love what I'm doing. But thinking of human nature, I believe many of the principles that go against directly with human nature. So it goes against ego, it goes against the love of gaining more money and power, fashion, looking different, distinctive, etc. I believe it's more into the hands of policymakers to incentivize the Doughnut Economic compliant businesses or entities that would really make a big shift and change in the direction of doing business. Especially that when you speak about David or small and medium enterprises, they are really fragile until they don't have that kind of leverage like corporates. The second thing is it's not a question, it's putting myself into the Doughnut Economic Action Plan business model. Would it be more practical to configure something or create something similar to the green stamp or ISO stamp that can brand entities that, let's say, green, Doughnut, economic, silver, gold, platinum, explaining or exposing that how much a company is complied with the Doughnut economic principle, and that might give more leverage or maybe a practical tool to policymakers to incentivize such entities, either small or corporate.
Yeah, I mean, good questions. I mean, in terms of verification, the Doughnut isn't a helpful tool for businesses, because to figure out what is the right level of anyway, the quantification at a company level doesn't work. It works at a national level. It works for a population group, and that population group's rights, but not necessarily at a company level. But there are existing verifications that do this quite well. There's the People and Planet First one that I mentioned that I'll put into the chat, that I think is a really useful way of assessing the deep design of a company. It's not the only way. There are lots of other models as well that are useful. Yeah, as Saad says, there's also a helpful tool that any company can use, like the B Corp certification. B Corp certification is quite different. It's not, it doesn't assess the things I'm talking about that we're focusing on, but it's a useful tool. So it assesses, does the company at least consider its social and ecological impacts? And that's useful. And very large scale global companies are becoming, B Corps. There are all sorts from all, diverse kinds of companies, some good, some not good, but still it's a useful tool, even for those that are not positive examples on social and ecological grounds. And in terms of the small SMEs, I mean, what we've found is that there's an optimal, there is maybe a limit to how large a company should be in any given sector. There are some where you need a large scale, you need the big capital investment, you need an economy of scale for it to be effective and efficient. And for others, actually, the larger it gets, the more it gets drawn away from its impacts. So, and like everything that we're doing, there's both sides of human nature. There's a competitive side of human nature, and there's a cooperative and mutualistic side of competitive nature of human nature. So we're trying to, I guess, balance out like an economy that has only been designed, and businesses that have only been designed around that competitive, greedy side that everyone tells us is all of us, to include a more balanced approach and go, actually, we have this other thing too. I mean, I've seen amazing collaboration between business people. I've seen amazing industry organizational cooperation and generosity as well. And that's all possible. We can design businesses and systems around it to foster that more, rather than only the side that currently dominates.
Great. I think we can have Mo, go ahead. Sorry.
No, just saying thank you.
Daniel, I think we can jump over to yours. And I think, Erinch, we are on time. If it's okay with you, we wrap it up after Daniel's question.
Sure.
Okay. Thanks, Erinch, for the talk. I'd like to bring a different reality to the conversation, which is in Brazil, and I think in a lot of other places we have a significant part of the people and the economy that's informal, that's not regulated, and we don't monitor properly. And the most important things for life, like energy, water, clean water, are very regulated services and have very regulated distribution lines. So the first impression is that the donut strategy is detached from these people. And because they are informal, they have no clue about how to make it circle and take care of the waste and whatever. So, do you already have an example of a community that has already break this frontier for us to get inspired by? Because that would be amazing. I do some studies in, for instance, well, I don't want to talk about what I'm studying. This is the question. Do you have any example? Because otherwise, it seems to me a very, very nice theoretical idea. And in a high level educated community like Finland, you can expect a change.
Mhm.
But otherwise, and when you attach technology, then there is okay, manuals are in English, so you have language barriers. That's it. If you have any practical examples to inspire us or for us to study further, that
Sure.
would be really nice. Thank you.
I mean, I have a lot. I spent most of the last 20 years working in sort of informal supply chains and various sort of models that touch on the informal economy. So I agree with the premise of your question that so much of the world economy, including in the supply chains of some of the companies we're talking about, touches into the informal economy as well. Loads of examples from the fair trade world. So when I was the CEO of the World Fair Trade Organization, we worked a lot on this, on how do we get sort of people that are involved in the informal sector to have better rights, better conditions, more inclusive and fair terms. Examples like Plastics for Change, which works with groups of waste pickers in India, and to ensure the waste pickers can have some sort of a collective voice, can have some sort of access to support and receive fair pay, for instance. And this is one of the examples we talk about in the paper that we have on this for business that myself, Kate, and others have written. Other examples, like that we've talked about, include like Sasha handicrafts or creative handicrafts, or models in sub-Saharan Africa, like in Zanzibar. There's a whole range of those examples of companies like Charco that are working with informal groups of workers, artisans, or waste pickers. I mentioned Manosto, Uruguay. They're working with sort of 12 different women's cooperatives that have formed of artisans and people who are dyeing fibers. So both in rural and urban settings, there are examples that use enterprise design to support the goal of helping people involved in the informal economy. This is more from a social perspective, but as you can hear from the business model that they're pursuing, like it's also a circular economy, whether it's Charco or Plastics for Change, which, by the way, then supplied The Body Shop, a major global company, with recycled plastic, picked up by the groups of waste pickers who were treated with fair trade terms. There are examples like that, but overall, the approach isn't a prescriptive theory. It's basically says that, look, we need to achieve social and ecological outcomes. In order to do that, business needs to pursue specific actions and strategies. To do that, let's design the business accordingly. And if you're dealing with the informal sector, then you would design it accordingly for that. You would go, okay, well, this is unregulated. There are practices that are undocumented. We need to make sure people feel empowered. People are becoming supported to be educated in the right way and have awareness raising about their conditions, etc. So it would be about, how do we design the business for the informal sector? How do you design it for agriculture? How do you design it for whatever the social or ecological context is? So the approach of Doughnut Economics is not to say this is like a theoretical prescriptive model. It's to say, actually, the practitioners in each sector know their sector best, and what we can do is help with some frameworks to open up the right questions about, okay, what kind of finance would you need in that business if you're dealing with the informal sector? What kind of governance and board structure would make sense? What's the ownership model that you're leaning into? So a lot of it would be about how do we inspire the right kind of creative innovation in enterprise design that is appropriate for that context, without experts from outside saying you should do X, Y, or Z, because it's a lot of the solutions will need to come from the ground up on that, I think.
Great. Thank you, Erinch. Thank you, Daniel. Okay, so I think we can wrap it up for today. We took a lot more time than estimated from yours, Erinch. Thank you so much for being here with us. And I think, yes, all the students have the links to be part of the amazing Doughnut Economics community. So you'll hear from us soon.
Great, and I've put into the chat the link to the theme page on business and enterprise, where all the documents can be found.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you so much for your time, Erinch. And yes, thank you to all the students for being here. We'll be in contact.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.